Hi there, and welcome to today's vlog. And I've got two things to show you today. First of all, something that I took down a couple of days ago from my notice board. And if you've been following these vlogs, you may have noticed that the items behind me are slowly disappearing. That's because we've been packing and sorting, and some of the stuff has already gone to our new home. So my office here, my study, is looking very bare. There's still a few items dotted around which I need to clear up and pack, but most of what was in here has now gone. So what did I take down from my notice board? This is a little poster that I got, I think, from a Christian bookshop years ago, and I've had it up on my notice board. Dare to deviate, or dare to deviate. It's a challenge to not take the easy path or the common path or the popular path just because it is popular or easy. And in the midst of that poster is some words from St. Paul's letters. Do not conform to this world, but be transformed. In other words, Paul is urging his readers not to just go with the flow, not just to do what the majority are doing necessarily, not to do that without thinking, just because it is easier to do so. It's not so easy, is it, to swim against the tide? Much easier to conform. But to live a life of following Jesus, it can be difficult because the challenge is to live the Christ-like life, and sometimes that stands in opposition to what maybe our friends, our work colleagues, or society is telling us. And to stand against that, to swim a different direction, to go a different way, is sometimes to court ridicule or at least questioning. I remember when I was in the early days of training to be a chartered accountant, and the job would sometimes entail travelling out of town to a various town or city around the country, perhaps for a few days or a week or so, or sometimes longer than that. And we visited the offices of a firm or a company that we were doing the audit for, and we used to work there doing the work that we needed to do. And it was a kind of custom within various members of staff to, because you had your overtime sheet to fill in, to add a little bit on to what was actually worked. So if you worked 3 hours overtime, you would maybe put 4 or 5 on a day. So kind of fiddling expenses, really. And there was a challenge for me because although I believed as a follower of Christ that it wasn't right to cheat in that way, or to put down fictitious amounts, if I put down the actual amounts, then my expenses claim or my overtime sheet would stand in contrast to others. And so I was kind of put under a great deal of pressure as a young man to toe the party line, as it were. I somehow found the strength to resist and just did what I felt was right, but it's not easy by any means. And I was reminded of the need to be authentic, to be real in our Christian lives, when I came across something else going back. This was written by a very good friend of ours whose name is Julie. She was one of our friends from Norwich, and she wrote me this card after we'd been announced that I'd been accepted for training for the Methodist ministry, but just before we'd actually left. And on the day, Julie writes in this card that on the day that she learned that I'd been accepted for training for the ministry, she read in a daily devotional book, I think, written by William Barclay. And he was talking about something, the subject of moderation. And he writes, this is a quote from Barclay: "If, for instance, we always pursue a cautious prudence in speech, we will certainly never offend anyone else, and we will certainly never get ourselves into trouble. But at the same time, we will never be able to say the things that rebuke people's sins and challenge their minds and stir their hearts. If we insist on following the middle and cautious course of action, we will probably not make any glaring mistakes, but we will never at any time produce the heroic and sacrificial actions which really matter in their effect on people." And I've kept that card, so that is over 30 years ago since I received that. And that's always been a challenge to me, because it's natural for all of us, isn't it, to want to be liked. We don't want to offend people. We don't want to upset people. And yet sometimes, well, let's face it, when you read the Gospels, Jesus did upset people, didn't he? Particularly the religious leaders. He said things that were made people feel uncomfortable. The challenge of the Gospel can be uncomfortable. It's challenging. It is a challenge, isn't it? It's a challenge, a costly thing to give up our lives to follow Christ. And the challenge for me as a church leader has been, over all those years, to resist the temptation to try to be a people pleaser, and instead, with my heart's desire, want to be a God pleaser. And I confess I've not always passed that test. Sometimes I've been too easily swayed by what I'm thinking how people will respond to what I'm going to say, or how I act in a certain way. And I confess that, but that's not the way to swim with the tide when that's opposing what God wants and has clearly directed. That is not a good thing. It is a comfortable thing. It is an easy thing. But ultimately, it will never satisfy. We've got to live our lives in the way that pleases God. Remember the story of the two builders? I've spoken about this before. Jesus said, "The one who builds his house on the rock is the one who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice." So there's a challenge to dare to deviate from the path of least resistance. Dare to step out of line. Dare to be different. Dare to stand and hold on to the cross of Christ, to live for Christ alone. That will continue to be my challenge, and hopefully when we get to our new house, I'll be able to find somewhere to put that up to remind me. So God bless you as you seek to follow him. Dare to deviate. Thank you for listening today.